Welcome to the No Limit, No Boundaries UFO podcast. Veteran UFO investigators Dan Spell and Mike Pinicello take on all aspects of the UFO phenomena with insight and honesty. It's all fair game here. No limits, no boundaries. And now, here are your hosts, Dan and Mike.
Welcome to Ufology, Fact or Fiction, Episode 2. My name is Daniel Spell. I'm the State Director of MUFON in Maryland, and my co-host is Mike Pinicello, the State Director of MUFON in Connecticut. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the alleged United States secret space program. This is not about the one that just started about 2 years ago, but rather it's one that allegedly has been around for decades. Mike, you're familiar with Dr. Michael Salla, I assume, right?
Oh, I am. I've read some of his books. How about you?
Yes, he is probably the biggest proponent of this alleged secret space program. He, at least in one of his books, he talks at length about William Tompkins, who supposedly designed the ships for the secret space program, the SSP. One project that Salla writes about is Project Horizon. The plan allegedly was to put 12 American soldiers on the moon for military and scientific purposes by 1966. That's well before the Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And the Navy allegedly planned to have 10,000 people on the moon by the 1970s. As part of a far more expensive manned lunar base project. But I don't know. I don't know what to think about that because I think at least I grew up on the Gemini and the Apollo program, and that technology, as good as it was, I don't see it at that level.
Well, I think that it goes back to Michael Salla. His books are. Either you believe him or you don't. And I personally, I have a hard time trying to put together in my mind how some of what he says and some of the sources he uses in the way of witness testimony are credible. I think to get to your point where, looking at the Apollo, the Gemini, and the Mercury technology, it would not make any sense that Project Horizon ever came to fruition, or the Navy's plan to put 10,000 people on the moon came to pass either, based just on that technology. But I don't know. I guess we should talk about the biggest name in the field is if we believe him or if we don't, and I guess that really determines whether you believe there's a secret space program or not.
There was a military program in addition to the one that we grew up watching. And there was a small group of military people who were trained to become astronauts. I'm not talking about the original Apollo and Mercury and Gemini astronauts. There's supposedly a group of others that the Air Force put together.
Let's look at what Michael Salla put together, anti-grav.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the evidence for there ever being any anti-grav technology in existence?
In the public domain, none. There's a lot written about it, a lot of documentation about it. It's all theoretical, of course. But yeah, I mean, and the question then is, if we have it, why aren't we using it?
Exactly.
Openly?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then his other component is so that's the biggest thing, anti-grav technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then his other point that Michael Salla talks about is that we got that technology from our adversaries, in this case, after World War II with the fall of the German Reich. But there's really no evidence for that either. Of course, there's Project Paperclip, the most famous part of the technology coming from the Third Reich, where that information of those scientists and engineers from the German Nazi regime were instrumental in advancing American technology. Case in point is going back to the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo was, we wouldn't go to the
Werner
moon.
von Braun, yes.
Werner von Braun, that's right.
Yes,
sorry.
absolutely.
So there is evidence for that. There is to show that it has come about, but I don't know. One other thing that might be evidence is just going back a little bit, and it just popped into my mind right now, and so I didn't put it on our show notes, but Kecksburg, you remember
Right.
when we talked about in the last episode, a lot of the witnesses said they saw like a bell-shaped craft, and that a lot of people would say that looks like what the German anti-grav technology that was the Glock, I think it was called. I always pronounce it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Which was spinning liquid mercury, and so if that also came over, then maybe there is some possible evidence that some of this is true, that there is some, but nothing concrete.
No, not at least on Project Horizon. I just, it's possible, but I would not say that we definitely had a Project Horizon to put 10,000 Americans on the moon.
I mean, just the load, just the amount, looking at what we have today, where NASA wants to go back to the moon. We're building the Artemis.
Mm-hmm.
That rocket is huge, and and the Orion capsule is teeny tiny. So you're telling me Elon Musk is trying to build his Starship to go to Mars, and that's a big rocket, but it's all to move that kind of equipment up there, you would need some very, very large equipment. And I don't know how you would keep that secretly. Where would you launch it? That no one would see you launching a rocket.
Right. Mike, there's another program, alleged program, a 4-tiered space program called NOVA, according to Dr. Salla, which was to be partially implemented through NASA. NOVA was apparently created to enable the U.S. Navy to use conventional rocket technology to establish large bases on the moon and Mars in the 1960s and 70s. But for unknown reasons, that program supposedly ended in July of 1969 when the U.S. landed on the moon. Those 4 stages, stage 1 was the Apollo moon landings, which we did do. Stage 2 was the Project Horizon, was to put 10,000 people on the moon. And stage 3 was to allegedly place U.S. bases on Mars and then other planetary bodies in the solar system, which, of course, as far as we know, did not happen. And stage 4 was to place manned Navy bases in 12 adjoining star systems. That's pretty darned, what's the word? Optimistic, because I don't see it. In fact, you know what, Mike? Maybe they did have plans to do this stuff, and that's all it was strictly theoretical. And and they really made no attempt to do it because the technology wasn't there. But maybe they did draw up hypothetical plans to do it. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think in the fact that you look at the time period, if we put it in the context of when this happened in the 1960s, there was a very, very strong belief that humans, that was like the space age. The cars were very space age like. Even Disney was focusing on like Tomorrowland and all the attractions. Everything was focused on space. So to say we are going to be a spacefaring civilization spacefaring civilization made perfect sense in the context of the period. And like you said, you can draw up all those plans, which I think they did. And I agree with you on that. But the execution of those plans, I don't know. But the only thing that's interesting is on stage 2 of your notes, which says put 10,000 people on the moon. It reminds me of that Ronald Reagan entry on which he did on 6/11/85, and he references that he had a classified briefing and that they had the ability to put 300 people into orbit.
Mhm.
And so what's interesting about that is at the time, the only known craft that the government had was the NASA space shuttles. And that could only hold a handful of people, maybe
Right.
12
I
at the
think it has a
most if you
crew
were
of
to,
like 6 or 7
yeah, 6 or 7. And
plus
if you
payload.
really scramble, put people in there, like really squish them, you could get maybe a few more, but nowhere near 300. So I don't know. I mean, again, it's always in the gray area. It's so hard to
Right.
say for sure. I'm sure people listening would still say, well, that's where the anti-grav comes in, and what William Tompkins said, and Corey, was it Corey Good?
Mhm.
What he
Yes.
said. But I don't know. I guess that comes back to, do you believe their stories? And I don't know about you. I'm not good at like, I know they're public figures and we can probably go in on them. But I'm not good at going after people's character. So I just will leave it as either you
Right.
believe them or you don't believe them, and leave it at that. But I think I personally agree with you. I don't think there's enough evidence to say that there is truly a secret space program.
I think, Mike, that we want people to dream up plans like that. We need visionaries to help mankind get out there and become spacefaring species. But just because there were plans and ideas drawn up doesn't mean it was ever carried over to fruition.
Mhm.
It's a bit of a leap, I think, to go from theoretical to putting it into practice.
I would agree with you. The only other thing I was thinking of is what you're saying about putting something in the theory in the practice. It kind of popped into my head, all of the people that would be involved in a secret space program, from the private all the way up to the admiral or the general. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that when, in their prime and when they retire, they're not going to talk. They take security oaths and security clearance. They don't want to lose that security clearance. But if you look at something like Witness to Roswell that Tom Carney and Don Schmidt wrote, those books, Witness to Roswell, The Real Area 51, and Return to Roswell, a lot of those witnesses were deathbed confessions. And over the span of their 30 years, they have had hundreds and hundreds of interviews of these deathbed confessions, or of people of all walks of life and all branches of the military and all ranks. And through just sheer numbers, they've compiled and put together very remarkable and very similar stories to each other. So you almost say, well, it can't really be made up because there's just too many people saying the same kind of general outline. But you have nothing on that with the secret space program.
Right.
I mean, in the 60s, you would think by now there would be some individuals that are on their deathbed and say, you know what, I'm going to tell them and say, yeah, we have a base on the moon. It's, 1,000 people, and we have battle groups going all over the galaxy right now, as Tompkins alleges that happened,
Right.
that the early ones came out in the 1980s, but you have none of that.
Right. And that's that very alleged product, Mike, is what we're going to talk about next. That is Solar Warden. According to William Tompkins, the U.S. had a secret space program called Solar Warden. It had 8 space battle groups. And that was apparently, according to Tompkins, part of an alleged secret space program alliance, which apparently has been developing strategies for full disclosure. But of course, that has not happened yet. But according to Tompkins, the U.S. converted submarines, which were first deployed in space in the 1970s, as a prelude to the development of larger, kilometers-long U.S. spacecraft. That's a lot to absorb. Converting U.S. nuclear-powered submarines to spacecraft, and imagine what it would take to get those up off the water and into space.
Well, an engineer listening to this would probably say, well, of course, silly. Is a submarine even built for space? I know it's airtight, it's watertight.
Well, it is airtight, yes, but it's built to withstand tons and tons of ocean pressure. But what I don't know about, exiting our atmosphere, surviving in the vacuum of space, and then how would it last coming back down through the atmosphere? With the heat coming back through the atmosphere might burn it up. I don't know.
That's right. And then, so if it can't come back into the atmosphere, like if they launch it once and then it has to stay in orbit, how do you get to it? I mean, in the ocean, they have lockout chambers. You can attach another craft to it. And you could probably say you could do the same thing now like you do for the space station. You fly a capsule up to it. It has a little chamber you lock in, and you go from one craft to the other. Is that the same way that they did it to get on and off these particular submarines? But you know what the interesting thing about that is the weird circumstantial evidence that may support that or may not, depending on how you take it, is that hacker, was it Gary McKinnon? Yeah,
Scottish.
Yeah. According to him, he said he saw a whole roster of officers that were not based on Earth, that were going in between ships in space. So, again, it gets back to, do you believe him? He doesn't really offer anything in the way of proof. He doesn't have any documents, or I don't believe he has any documents. I think it's all just what he says, right?
Yeah, I don't know that he downloaded or printed off any of the documentation. And I do know he was looking at a lot of jail time, but apparently that somehow or other, the UK and the US came to some type of closure, and he was never really brought over here to stand trial for that.
And the UFO conspiracists would say that's proof that he came on to something that he shouldn't have. However, if you look at other more recent whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, the U.S. kind of half-heartedly went after him too, until he. So it kind of is the same effort by the U.S. We'll go after you, but we really won't put the screws to you, kind of thing.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's just so hard to tell. I still kind of wonder though about the technology. If you can actually take a submarine and launch it, and don't forget, like our submarines today, like a Seawolf class submarine, is much more advanced than, say, a submarine of the 1980s, which is an early version of the Los Angeles attack submarines. Yeah, I just don't know the physics behind it. With the mechanical engineering behind it, physics too. I mean, how would you get one of those things up there? I guess this is where the anti-grav technology would come in again.
Right. So you mentioned Corey Goode earlier. There are folks like Corey Goode, Randy Kramer, and Michael Rolfe. Gentlemen, these guys claim to have been part of a program unofficially called 20 and Back. Are you familiar with that?
I am. They get age regressed back
Yes,
20
they
years.
apparently, allegedly, were recruited at a very young age, and somehow the U.S. government, in partnership with ETs, made it possible for them to serve 20 years as part of that secret space program. And then when they finished their 20-year tour, they were age regressed back to say age 15 or whatever it was when they were recruited. And then I believe that all of their memories of that service were wiped away. Now, has there been any proof of that? No, not that I'm aware of. But there's a lot written about it.
There is, and most of those individuals are primary sources for Michael Salas's books.
Yes.
So,
and before our show began tonight, I mentioned a guest that we had at our MUFON Maryland monthly meeting on Saturday. And she said during her talk that she was a part of that program. Now, we did not ask her for proof because I don't know that she would have been willing to offer it up. But there are other people besides Corey, Randy, and Michael that claim to have been involved in it.
well, what's this with the multiple secret space programs and the secret space
That's
program
that Secret Space Alliance. Solar Warden was one of the projects involved in the Secret Space Alliance. It's a group of people who want to do full disclosure. And that includes the alleged truth about ETs, about ancient human civilization on the Earth's interior, and the release of advanced technologies to revolutionize life on Earth. That's that Secret Space Program Alliance.
Well, that's interesting. But the other thing about going along with this, it kind of reminds me of what else Michael Salas and Corey Good said, that there is all these other secret space programs in orbit around us. There's like the Dark Fleet and the Mayan fleets, all these different. There's and these dark fleets supposedly work with the reptilians, and Solar Warden kind of works with, like, you have the Nordics. Again, yeah, I don't know. It's a really good story, but I don't know. Do you think they're working with the Nordics? Do you think that?
I'm not sure. There's so many stories about the different species. Some are good, some are bad. And our guest the other day, she said that you can't divide these species into groups of good and bad, because like humans, there's good and bad in each of them. So no, in other words, if there are really reptilian ETs, there are benevolent ones, and then there are hostile ones. And that makes sense because that's how it is with the human race too. There are good people and not so good people.
That's true. I guess my other question would be is do you think there's enough evidence to show that the Nordics even exist? Because if there's not enough evidence to show that the Nordics exist as a species, then there's not any evidence in turn to say that they work with the secret space program.
It's one of those things, Mike. In fact, all of this secret space program, the different ET species, you cannot prove it yet, and you cannot disprove it. So you're kind of left with nothing but questions.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the different species, and I'm looking at the notes there about the secret space program being involved with the Galactic Federation.
That's what I was thinking of too. I couldn't think of their name. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing I've heard it called as a Galactic Federation, which it smacks of the original Star Trek series and also the Star Wars movies.
That is true.
It kind of mirrors that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does. Somewhere out there, maybe Spock is on their own version of the Enterprise. But the UFO.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just looking at our program notes, and during the research for the show, I found that there was also a joint U.S.-France space program, secret space program. A gentleman by the name of Jean-Charles Moyen had allegedly had ET contact that culminated in him being identified as a potential candidate for France's secret space program. And Jean-Charles, he believes that same Galactic Confederation cooperated with French authorities in his recruitment. And that began at a very young age, at age 13. And then he began his own service at the age of 21. Now, I personally have not heard much about the French being involved in any, other than this. I haven't heard much about that.
No, neither have I. I have no real background on that particular topic either.
But he too claims to have been age regressed and returned to his point of departure, just like the U.S. people did.
And how do they remember this? Do they just start having like bits and pieces of this memory come back to them?
That's a good question, because I had heard that when they are age regressed back to their, the original age when they began their service, was pretty much wiped out. Now, how they're getting those memories back, I don't know.
Well, my cynical way of looking at this is if you have the technology to take someone who is 40 years old or 20 years, so let's see, you're 15, so 35 years old, and regress them back to 15, you can't wipe their brain. You can't wipe their memories. We have drugs that could wipe people's memories.
Yeah,
that can do a pretty good job of it. And we're nowhere near that advanced. So I don't know. Someone listening will probably say, well, that's why you have hypnosis and all that. But I'm sorry. There are drugs out there that you can do something and never, ever know what you did. And
Sure.
we are nowhere near that technology level. So I just have such a hard time believing that you can regress someone, but yet not erase their memories. But to each their own. If people want to believe that, that's fine. I don't know about that. And then you have on our notes, we have the idea that the secret space programs have existed since the Second World War.
That's what's alleged, yes. And that would dovetail with the Project Paperclip, when we brought over the Third Reich scientists.
Yes, and in that little activity of ours, we could have brought off the Glock and all that other technology that supposedly was out there. Well, we'll have to just wait and see. Hopefully someday we'll know the true answer to this, but I don't know. What's this Project Saint you have on, and Celestial Eagle?
Anti-satellite program that was supposedly put into place, or at least began. That's really all that I know about it. Project Saint is one. There's also allegedly back in the 1960s, there was supposed to have been a manned orbiting laboratory put up, MOL. And once again, I have found no no proof to verify that. There was a reference to Project Saint in a document. That's how I found that.
What's Celestial Eagle?
That one I have to continue my research on. But is again another program that was supposedly being worked on.
Well, I wonder if any of these. I wonder if Reagan's Star Wars program. They said that the Earth's practical purposes was to go after the Soviet Union and their ballistic missiles, and to be able to strike first and eventually bankrupt the Soviet Union by having this massive arms race.
Mm-hmm.
But some say that the cover for that is more of a way to enact the secret space program. But again, there's no evidence for that. There's no way to definitively say that was the true intention of that particular program.
Is it accurate, Mike, when President Reagan's goal of the Strategic Defense Initiative, that never actually came to fruition? It was in the plans, but then for whatever reason, after President Reagan left office, it was not carried forward, was it? At least not that I'm aware of.
Parts of it started and stopped, but like so many, it was a project that, my understanding, my view on it is it was a project by the president. Just like every project, every president has their own little project that they kind of start, and then the next one wants to put their own stamp on national security or the national narrative, and cancels it and starts with their own. But you could say, and after Reagan, it was Bush Sr., and Bush Sr. was supposedly very much in the know of aliens and ufology, what's out there, what we have, and he was involved in a lot of the black budget programs. So, maybe the conspiracy of would be that he canned it on purpose because maybe there was something else going on, more advanced than what Reagan had in store. But I don't know. Again, like if you go back to Reagan's diary, and he mentions the very large ship that can carry 300 people. He had his own UFO sighting. He was a real believer in it. So I don't know.
I believe President Reagan was flying somewhere when he was governor of California.
Correct.
When he had his sighting, right? He happened to look out the window, and there was an object right beside his aircraft.
He did. The other thing that's interesting is what Reagan was doing with all of this Star Wars and space technology coincides with what these so-called secret space program whistleblowers like Tompkins.
Yes, it does.
And some of this happened in the 70s, but if you're involved, if anyone who's listening, or even you or me, it takes time to develop these craft. And a lot of what we've been talking about happened in the 80s. These supposed crafts were launched in the 1980s, but you would need time to test the technology in the 60s, develop the prototypes in the 70s, and actually launch the production model in the 80s. So the timeline fits if you think about it. And if you look at more modern defense contracts, it does also fit with the same kind of research and development, then moving into some kind of production of it. So, again, to me, that seems a little circumstantial, but there's no way to definitively say that yes or no. But the timeline fits. So, I don't know. I think as we go through this, as we move into our next couple topics for our podcast, we actually might wind up, especially like next week's topic, when we bring that up, we might actually wind up talking a little more about the secret space program, because it's like this tentacle, it's like this octopus with tentacles going into all these different fields of ufology. and they're all interconnected. And
Mhm.
though we are talking about one specific incident now, which is the secret space program, it does have its fingers on so many other areas of ufology that we could probably reference or discuss. And maybe it'll bring more clarity to this overall question. Is there truly a secret space program out there?
Just
The
something
lights,
to think about, Mike.
yes,
Just
indeed.
everything we've talked about so far, and at least what I've read about, is US and European centric.
Mhm.
Have you personally read or heard anything about any similar activities involving Russia or China? I have not. No indication that they would have had their own secret program.
No, I haven't. The only thing I've heard is that they, and again, it's incidental. I don't have any definitive proof, but looking at blogs and reading so-called experts papers on it, each country like Russia and China has had their own version of Roswell. So in theory, or the hypothesis could be, they have the technology to reverse engineer something and make it into their own secret space program, similar to what maybe we did if Roswell happened and we got a hold of their craft. And that's something we didn't really discuss yet tonight either. We keep saying that we got this through the Nazi technology and what Michael Salla was saying, but there is that other line of thought like Corso, or who says that we developed it from Roswell, all of the technology we have, and maybe some of which the propulsion technology, like what Bob Lazar would say, is with regards to the engine and how they move these craft and how they operate these craft, came from our own experiences and our own crashes. And so to dovetail into the discussion, do China and Russia have their own secret space programs? I don't know. I don't really know of any evidence to support that. But which I kind of think might be a little more plausible, if we had our own crashes, there's no reason to say that we didn't reverse engineer some of that technology,
right,
and then use that in our own version of aircraft, maybe not as advanced, like the TR-3B, some say could be ours, the triangle craft, that has anti-grav technology. So maybe Russia and China did the same thing, or any of the other countries in the world that had their own crashes, because but it'll take a lot of money. So we'll probably say maybe those countries had the budget to do something like that.
There's one wild card thing here with the U.S. program, and I'm sure you've heard about this, is the missing money from the black budget. Apparently, I can't quote the dollar amount, but I think it's close to $1 trillion that the government could not account for. Now, was that just a simple case of mismanagement, bad accounting, or was $1 trillion really siphoned off to be used somewhere else? And if that is the case, did it go to a secret U.S. space program?
I don't know. That's a really good question. It was in the trillions. I don't remember the exact number, but that's, I think, where that joke always comes. It doesn't cost $100 to get a toilet bowl seat,
right?
And a toothbrush doesn't cost $80. So, I mean, the black budget is huge. So
yes, that's the thing about it. Nobody knows for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At least of which the American taxpayer doesn't know.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess that, again, that leads to that gray area of evidence. Some of it could be used for that, definitely. I don't know. I guess to tie that in with something, move back up a second. Do you think it's possible that the secret space program, if it does exist, maybe came from Roswell technology, Roswell reverse engineering, similar to like what Bob Lazar and Corso have said that we figured it out. We being the United States defense and military industrial complex, and we have places like S4 out by Groom Lake that is working on building these and figuring out how these things work.
I think so. I think if you read Colonel Corso's book, he lays it out pretty clear in there what happened to some of that technology. So yeah, I think they probably handled it as best they could. According to Corso, they took some of the technology and gave it to defense contractors and let them run with it. So yeah, I think it is very possible.
So with that, moving that logic forward, that money could be where a lot of that black budget money, those trillions are going to, is trying to figure that out. And the end result, well, it's not just to make humanity better because they're not releasing any of that technology to the public. It's probably to build weapons. So if the end result is to build some kind of craft, then by definition it would be, and it's a spacecraft and it's secret, then by definition it's a secret spacecraft for a secret space program. So maybe that's the answer. I don't know. There's so many avenues to go through and figure out.
Add one more wrinkle to this whole discussion, Mike, and that is what's his name? Bear with me. The Breakaway Society.
The Vril Society?
The Breakaway Society, yes, as part of that space program. Richard Dolan has written about this, and then he writes that secret space program, the so-called global elites have a plan to leave the Earth if in the event of some cataclysm, and that's the Breakaway Society. Have you heard of that?
I actually just read his book, his pamphlet for that particular topic this past week. We were discussing it on Saturday, actually, a group of ufologists and I. And it makes sense that the defense industry and the elites would be involved in it. I mean, if you just look on the non classified side, or you have 2 billionaires right now battling it out for rocket technology to send us to Mars, SpaceX and Blue Orion. So, it does lend some credence to the fact that they're going to want to preserve themselves. I mean, it's basic human nature. You want to preserve your life and your family's life. And if you have the economic resources to make that happen, I think most people would do it. You would hope to be more altruistic and say the betterment of humanity, but to be a little more on the selfish side also seems to be part of the human nature. So I think Richard Dolan is definitely onto something when he makes that conclusion.
He may well be.
But we are starting to move towards the end of our allotted time.
Okay.
Do you want to, so bottom line, fact or fiction, what's your thoughts on that? Secret space program, what do you think?
Based on the information I have, and granted it is limited, I'm going to say possible, but very unlikely. There's just a lot of conjecture, a lot of books have been written about it. I just don't see it as being a fact. I think it's a nice conspiracy theory. It makes for interesting reading, but I don't see it. Otherwise, why, just as one example, why would Elon Musk be using rockets and not using, the anti-gravitic propulsion? Why are we doing that? We don't need to. That would be a menace waste of time and money.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say that I would say based on the evidence, it's too much in the gray. The foundation of the evidence is based on maybe questionable sources, or you have to get the provenance and authentication of the sources to say for sure. But I think my caveat would be that the secret space program, in the way that ufology says it exists, probably I don't think so. I think there's just not enough evidence to suggest that. That the sourcing for it is much too questionable, to say for sure. But I do think there is something out there. I to what extent it is, I have no idea, and to how advanced it is, I can't really speculate on that either. I'm sure there's something out there. Based on, I still would go with the Roswell technology. I think Roswell probably happened. I think Roswell did happen. I think we just reverse engineered through trial and error, and maybe with some of the work with the Germans, because the Germans also supposedly before World War II had a UFO crash in was it the Black Forest, I think. So they had the technology, and we know that they were excellent engineers. And there's a lot of evidence to show that the Glock did exist, that it was some kind of anti-grav technology with the liquid mercury. I think that's more of the direction we went into, something terrestrial, but not to the advanced state as what's in the secret space program that ufology claims its existence on.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to say.
I would just add one last thing, and that is the programs that you and I discussed earlier. Documentation is out there for Project Horizon and NOVA, and I think people should just take that for what it was. These were plans that the U.S. had. Doesn't mean that they were ever put into place. There's no secret space force. I don't think there's anything sinister going on here. That's all that it was. Plans. Like we said earlier, you need visionaries to put ideas to paper, but don't try not to make that immediate leap into they thought about it, they're doing it. And that's it.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I had a class in history in graduate school once, one of the history classes I was taking, and the professor said, you can't look at the documents in 21st century lenses. You have to look at the documents in the period in which the documents were written. And I was taking a class on 1800s. So that would be like 1700 to like 1799. The society back then was different. There was different values. It was a different concept, a mind concept, than it was today. And when these documents were made in the 1960s and 70s, we were in a period of the moon. The future was now. I mean, we have even taking it back to Disney. We had Epcot. Walt Disney was trying to create in the 1970s the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It was all going to be futuristic. That's the way the United States and the people in this country viewed the future. That by now we would all be the Jetsons, with our little skyships living in clouds. And obviously that didn't come about. But when you put that in the context of when these documents were written and how they were written and why they were written, and it does make sense that they had grand plans for a future where we would be an interplanetary society. And, you can argue the reasons why that didn't happen on another podcast, but I think you're right. You are right. I don't think you're right. I know you're right that you have to look at these documents as what they are, is that there were ideas that just were planned but didn't happen, or happened in a modification. I know we're running out of time, but one example of that of a modification is if you remember in the 80s, the U.S. and NASA wanted to build a space station. They called it Daedalus, I think was its name, or something like that. I forget the exact project name. I think it was. And that got morphed into the International Space Station. And now when you look at, like with the Artemis program, they're looking at a lunar gateway before they even go to the moon as a waypoint. So the plans are there. It's just things get modified and changed. So these plans maybe just never came to fruition for that.
Right.
What's our next topic, Dan, for next month?
Next podcast, we are going to talk about the alleged activity in Antarctica. Boy, that's hard for me to say for whatever reason. Story goes that after the fall of the Third Reich, the Nazi Party, a lot of them fled Germany and went down to South America and then onward to Antarctica. And while there, the Nazis allegedly formed a partnership with extraterrestrials. And that's our next topic, Mike. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. I think that's a target-rich environment for.
Yes. Well, it'll be a good one. Looking forward to it.
Me too. And that will be next month's. So in the meantime, please continue to listen to our podcast and hit that little subscribe button on our YouTube page. The more subscribers, it helps us out tremendously. Please also feel free to add your comments or email us at ufofactorfictionpodcast@gmail.com, or place a comment in the comment box. So good night, everyone. Again, thank you for listening to us, and we'll talk to you again on our next podcast next month.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.